Warning, the following podcast is extremely chaotic. Confusion and existential dread may occur. Welcome to Backroom 12, your little corner of backwater isolation where society hopefully can't find us. I'm your omnipresent, disembodied voice of a fairy godmother here to present to you yet another existential crisis. Today's episode is Everybody wants a podcast, but not enough of us listens to them. Plus, everybody's just a bundle of cognitive functions. Before we get into that, let's get into what exactly is Backroom 12. It's a few things, but it's primarily me, myself, and I talking to myself for an extended period of time. Quick fact, what's a backroom? According to ye old Google, a backroom is a place where secret, administrative, or supporting work is done. In other words, it's the equivalent of the locker room during gym. A safe place. The goal of this little podcast is to open up a space for those of us whose souls are too big for our human bodies. In effort to not explode, we'll talk about it. In short, this is just a huge cluster of thoughts, dreams, and ideas serialized. Each topic will probably be drastically different from the next, but hey, isn't that how life works? Before we start, make sure you follow Backroom 12 on Instagram and Twitter, where I'll be posting not only updates on each episode, but also behind-the-scenes clips and other little random thoughts. Now let's get into segment 1, aka What's a Podcast and Why You Should Keep Listening. The definition of a podcast, as said by Google, is a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series or new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. A mouthful. Quick history facts. That's totally not copied from Wikipedia or anything. In the 1980s, RCS, Radio Computing Services, provided music and talk-related software to radio stations in a digital format. Many other jukeboxes and websites in the mid-1990s provided a system for sorting and selecting music or audio files of different digital formats. In September 2000, the first system that enabled the selection, automatic downloading, and storage of serial episodic audio content on PCs and portable devices was launched. Later on, a journalist named Ben Hammersley suggested the term podcasting as a name for the technology to describe the automatic download and synchronization of audio content. By 2004, the New York Times reported podcasts across the United States and in Canada, Australia, and Sweden, mentioning broadcast topics from technology to veganism to movie reviews, and the rest is modern history. Here are some of the current statistics for podcasting in 2020, as noted by Brentastic.com. 1. Over 55% of the U.S. population have listened to a podcast. 2. In 2020, over 155 million people listen to a podcast every week. 3. Around 24% of the U.S. population, which is about 68 million, listens to podcasts weekly. And 4. Podcast listeners consume an average of 7 different shows per week. And 5. There are over 700,000 active podcasts and 29 million podcast episodes available worldwide. And finally, 6. The most popular age group for podcast listeners is 25 to 44, which makes up 49% of total listeners. So I'm going off the groundless assumption that you, the listener, are either a friend of mine, family, or some other adventurous soul braving through seas of podcasts in search of a gem. I'll also assume that you're somewhere within the Gen Z/millennial generation, i.e. the bulk of the population who has virtually no interest in podcasting. Here's a few reasons why you need some podcasters in your life, and if it already is, feel free to stick around, for education. And for segment 2. Fast fact time. 1. You can listen to podcasts anywhere. Podcasts are pretty much like a one-sided phone call that you can pull up anywhere. When you're out and you're feeling a little lonely, you can pop in some earphones and there's a conversation sitting right there for you. Or, taking into account the rise of ASMR, autonomous sensory meridian response, you can use podcasts as a sleep aid. Some people like to fall asleep to another person's voice. Totally not a sign of emotional neglect. 2, they're perfect for mindless chores. There are a number of tasks that don't require a lot of brain power, such as driving to work and cleaning the house. Podcasts are a great way to pass the time, letting you immerse yourself in an enlightening conversation, even though in real life you're probably doing something mundane like scrubbing toilets or washing sinks. 3, you can learn about just about anything from a podcast. They aren't only good for entertainment, but also great for education. The time you normally spend doing those mindless chores or exercising can be used to help you level up and gain new insight. Whether you want to learn about art, history, life advice, or any number of other things, there's a podcast out there to teach you. Now, of course, this is in the context of all podcasts, but the prior still applies to Backroom 12. I won't go into this elaborate speech every episode, but for episode 1, I thought it was important. Moving on to segment 2, what we've all been waiting for. You, me, and everyone else on this planet is just a little bundle of cognitive functions. And yes, this is very important going forward because I'm addicted and will probably find a way to assert this into every conversation about humankind possible. So yeah, it sounds weird, but there's a community of people and researchers who have managed to simplify every human being down to 16 personalities, noted by what specific cognitive functions you develop and use over time. Crazy, I know, but it's actually scarily accurate. It's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indication System, MBTI for short, also known alternatively as the 16 Personalities Test. The original versions of the MBTI test were constructed by 2 Americans, Catherine Cook Briggs and her daughter Isabel Briggs Meyer, hence the name. It's based heavily off a conceptual theory proposed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, who speculated that people experience the world using 4 principal psychological functions: sensation, intuition, feeling, and thinking. And that one of these 4 functions is dominant for each person. The 4 categories are introversion/extroversion, sensing/intuition, thinking/feeling, and judging/perceiving. Each person is said to have one preferred quality from each category, producing 16 unique types. As said by the Myers-Briggs Association themselves, the purpose of the MBTI inventory is to make the theory of Jung understandable and useful in people's lives. The essence of the theory is that much seemingly random variation in behavior is actually quite orderly and consistent, due to basic differences in ways individuals prefer to use their perception and judgment. Now, I could go into all the nooks and crannies of how to find your type and other mind-boggling aspects to it, because it does get a little heavy, but I really want to talk about how world-changing this was for me personally. Yeah, we all see the world differently, but I'm telling you, when I started to look into the system, literally I cannot stop myself. It's now I see the world in a simpler but incredibly complex way, and it's scary. But we'll keep trucking. I may make this all sound confusing, but to simple it down, depending on which of the options you relate to or pick from before, for example, extroversion or introversion, you get a letter. And there's 4 categories, so you end up with a mix of 4 letters. Mine are INFP, which stands for introversion, intuition, feeling, and perceiving. Boom. You just learned basically my entire existence. And the reason why I so much relate to it is because, we all have a personality that we associate ourselves with. It is not so much about who we are internally, but more about how we think society paints us. I don't know if that's something that happens for everybody, but for most people, it's you don't really know who you are, and you base it off how other people perceive you, if that makes sense. So for me, it was the same way. In middle school, I always thought I was the funny friend, the extroverted, joking around, never serious type friend, you know what I'm talking about? Because I see it through kind of a racial lens too, because I went to a predominantly white school, and it was kind of this, I won't say detachment from my culture, but detachment from myself in general, because you know how it can be when you're not in a specific space that's similar to you and that could cater to you. You kind of just end up going with the flow, and the flow for me was the comedic relief character. The little funny hee hee ha ha, which is really funny because I don't consider myself funny either, but other people do, and I think that's just an aftermath effect. So that's kind of the way I carried myself up until I found MBTI too, because it was how do you discover yourself as a teen, just out of nowhere? And so it was a real discovery moment for me, because not only did I finally find something that was relatable, but it also broke it down in a sense, because it worked where I found a test, and it was because there's a split between like the actual website for Myers-Briggs and then like the sister site, which is like a different organization who took the ideology of it but like make it into a more accessible test. And when I first took the test, I got correctly diagnosed, but sometimes you won't get the right diagnosis type, I should put it. And it was like, for once, I wasn't described as a comedic relief character, I should put it, because there is like a sort of dehumanizing aspect to it too. Because when you see the world through like main character, side character, comedic relief, romantic interest, it can be devaluing, because like how often do you really evaluate seriously a comedic relief character? And when I discovered it, it was like, maybe that's not how we're all sorted. Because like in pop culture, we do, not even pop culture, just in our generation, we do use the rhetoric like, oh, I'm the main character, but we don't think about the weight that it carries, especially like in a damaging environment like middle school, where a lot of people, get the short end of the stick when it comes to character development, I should put it. So yeah, because it's like, first, not only did I realize that I've never been an extrovert, which is like obvious, but at the same time, because there's a difference between being an extrovert and forcing yourself to be outwards, if you know what I mean. Because I think I've always been private, but it wasn't private enough that it was true to me. Like, I could make something up and be like, yeah, this is all me, but it's not really me, if you know what I mean. And then like the way they type it also not only thinks about you on a mental level, but also like on a reaction level, on the way you see the world itself. And it was like, this is me, because a lot of times people get called weird or out of the ordinary for seeing the world in a different way, and because we don't really evaluate it on that sense of scale, it ends up falling flat, or it just ends up seeming out of ordinary when it's really not. And so for me, I always viewed it as kind of like things were deeper than they really were. And I don't say that to be like, like, oh, I'm so poetic, I'm so deep. No, just like everything had an underbelly to it. But I always had an approach to it that was kind of, I don't want to say immature, but childlike in a way. Because a lot of stuff to me, it isn't as serious as we make it seem, but there is a more serious side to it, if that makes sense. And that was basically what they were describing me as. It was just like, yeah, mind-boggling, revealing. And I didn't discover until like mid-high school. Well, by this point, I was already like cemented my personality. Like, this was me. I'm a little clown, a little jokester. And by the time I realized it's not, it was like, oh, people perceive me? Is how people sense me? Is this who I am now? I was like, whoa, that's an experience. I don't want to deal with that. But everything is on a journey. Everything happens for a reason. And, it's cool. But back to the main point. Like, yeah. So not only did MBTI, like, open up a world for me, but it also changed how I look at everybody else. And it's so weird. Because how often do you walk up to somebody, you meet them, you're like, yeah, you're an introvert, or you're an extrovert, or you're a sensor, you're a feeler. I'll just be like, oh, like, I'm so sorry to put you in the box, but you fit this description so well, and that's probably how I'm gonna treat you. Because you know how it is, right? When you don't even, like, when you feel like you don't have a solid personality to begin with, and then you suddenly discover it, and then all of a sudden it's like, you look at everybody else and you're like, you're hiding something. You have a real personality underneath. I just need to dig it out. But anyways, back to the point. If I can even remember the point. Oh my God. But yeah, how you meet people, because it's like, I even started typing my family members, and it just became so much, like, going back to what I said originally, it became so much simpler yet so complex. Because it's like, everybody can fit into one of the types, and it's like, it's not, it seems like pseudoscience, but it really does make sense. And so when you view the world that way, it's like everyone is complex in their own way. Because, like, obviously everybody isn't the exact same, but they can be summed up in a few points that relate to other people. And by doing that, it's just like, it's became so much easier to deal with people, especially when you're an introvert. I mean, that's like for an entirely different episode, The Adventures of an Introvert, thinking you're an extrovert, and then having suffered the difficulties of it. But it's like, I know how to deal with people now. Oh, clap. Clap. But yes, I discovered MTBI. I don't know how much in depth I need to go about it, and it did make a significant difference in my life, not only how I view myself, but also other people. And then the last point to hit about MBTI is like, often it gets compared to the zodiac system. And now that's an entirely different conversation, but I'll go into it anyways. I don't like the astrology zodiac in the mainstream, because it's like, I know there's your sun, your moon, things like that, but it's like, I don't even know if I want to put it against MBTI like that, because the mainstream version of zodiac is so odd, because that also shaped how I was prior to getting into MBTI, because I thought that, because I'm a Gemini sun, and I was like, oh, so I have to be this extroverted, preppy, happy-go-lucky, gossiping type person, because you know how it is, especially when you like go on any social media platform, it's like instantly you get a set of stereotypes, and somehow everyone fits it. And I'm really convinced that sometimes we just morph our personalities based on what society puts us as. Like, yeah, going back into that main character, side character type thing, but like on a more broader level, if I can put it. So I don't really like it. People sometimes hear me talk about it, and I'm just like, am I two-faced? is that how people perceive me? Is that me? Because that's essentially how how pop culture puts the Gemini. And it's like, oh, no, guys, I'm not an extrovert, I'm an introvert. I'm really not. I don't like to gossip. If anything, I don't want to say anything if I have the choice. But if I have to, it won't be gossip. And if you catch me gossiping, he must be a very bad person. I don't know what to tell you. But like, yeah, it's just coming back to the MBTI thing in general. It's like, it's not the same as Zodiac, and I wouldn't substitute one for the other either, because there is like, MBTI is more on a mental level, and Zodiac is more like a spiritual type level. So whichever you dabble in, cool. But I don't, because once you get into it, you'll probably see like the comparisons between Zodiac, and I'm just like, no. Because when I tell you it's like polar opposites, the INFP is described as like a very sentimental type of being. People who not only value their inner world, but can come off as very weird and strange, which I've gotten all my life, but I just kind of ignore, like, no, and like anime, that's all. But it's like, yeah, they seem as very, very introverted beings themselves. But when you put that up against a Gemini, who's supposed to be like this very high energy, bubbly, social person who values essentially their outer view, that it doesn't go together. It's not. And sometimes it can be damaging too, because like, if you genuinely are a person who prefers to be by yourself, and that's where you get your energy from, because like, quick fact, introversion and extroversion isn't about whether or not you're social, but rather where you get your energy from. So like, for me, I always thought it was so weird that like, when I'm around people, I get so tired, I get so drained, and I really thought it was just me. And then I saw this one post, I remember it precisely, before I even found MBTI or knew about the personality types. I was like, oh my God, this is me. It was like one of those little Twitter posts, and it was like, don't you ever just want to get away from people, or you need time to recharge after being with people so long? And I was like, yes, that's me. And then when I found out the true definition of introvert and the true definition of extrovert, it was like, why is pop culture screwed it like that? Like, an introvert isn't what people think it is. An introvert is a person who gets their energy from being alone. Doesn't mean they don't have social skills. Like, they can be a very social person around the right people and be very cordial and have, manners. but they still value their time alone. And extroverts, they get their energy and they get their identity from being around other people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because like we demonize introversion, but then cast extroversion as the ideal, when really it shouldn't be like that. Like maybe that's just me, and I'm like, oh, a world with all introverts, that'd be so pretty. But no, like we all have our strengths and our weaknesses, and most introverts aren't socially awkward. They just need time to themselves more so than extroverts do. And having that deeply personal side of you, I think that's really important. It's something we need to stop demonizing or criminalizing per se. I think that's enough of me ranting. I think that pretty much sums it up. 1, keep with podcasts. Make sure you look into podcasts and get good into it, because they're good for just about anything. And then 2, going forth, I'm probably going to bring up MBTI again, and I hope I properly explain just why I am, because it is very important to me, very key to my character development, very much made me a main character. That about wraps up the episode. Sorry about the rambling. We'll get it together later. Signing off. This is your omnipresent, disembodied fairy godmother. See you next episode.